Welcome to Global Money Talk, brought to you by Sampro TV. Greetings to all of our viewers from across the United States, Korea, and around the world. We're coming to you live from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange in New York City, the financial capital of America. I'm Remy Blaire, and joining me today is Tai Wong, independent proprietary trader. Happy Monday, Tai, and good morning. It's the final full trading week of the year.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's like the middle of December. It's about to be the winter solstice, just about, I guess. And yeah, I mean, the year 2024 is coming to a close.
I know it's hard to believe because next week will be a holiday shortened week in the U.S. for the markets with Christmas next Tuesday and Christmas Day on Wednesday.
Yeah, I think people are going to be sort of mailing it in next week. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on this week.
There is.
A lot of stuff going on actually today, but it'll be a quiet week. Hopefully, a quiet week next week. Although you're just afraid of some of the liquidity-driven moves, but the market doesn't seem like it's sort of in the mood for that, or there's a setup for that. So hopefully, we get through this week, and people just for the poor souls who have to work most of next week, hopefully it's a relatively quiet one, and they'll be enjoying the fruits of Christmas.
Yes, and this week, as you mentioned, we have a lot going on even today, but of course the big event of the week is the Federal Reserve rate announcement. The meeting kicks off tomorrow. The two-day meeting ends on Wednesday afternoon with the rate decision, but we also hear from Powell. We get the summary of economic projections as well. But before we get into all of that, tell us what day today is.
Well, today actually is the 251st anniversary of the Boston Tea Party. And that was December 16th, 1773, and a lot of Boston sort of patriots, the Continentals, were really upset that the English government, Parliament, said you have to buy tea from the East India Company, which was kind of struggling a little bit, and they said you have to buy our tea. Oh, plus, by the way, there's a tax on the tea where most Americans at the time, I suppose, were drinking tea smuggled in by the Dutch, what they didn't have to pay taxes for. So this was taxation without representation, and what really was, the start of the, one of the big events that eventually led to the American Revolution. So 251 years today, and for you real history buffs there, it's actually an important day in the history of China too. Back in 755, at the height of the Tang Dynasty, one of the military governors started a rebellion that lasted about 2 or 3 years, and it really damaged the dynasty so badly that it never really recovered. So what's interesting about this story is it all started because there are 4 great beauties of ancient China. One of them, considered the greatest, was supposed to be so beautiful that she captured the heart of the emperor, and who just stopped paying attention to anything else except her. And what was really scandalous, she started out being his son's wife.
Oh.
So a famous rebellion, a famous day. Eventually, they almost lost the dynasty, and she had to be done away with because his commander said it's either you or her, so pick. And what's interesting about that is ever since 755, in China, they've really distrusted very powerful generals and very powerful, sort of governors. They always want government and power centralized. So huge impact from that day. But anyway, a very interesting story. Love the fact that this guy loved this woman so much. It was his son's wife, his daughter-in-law. That's a little,
That sounds a little bit scandalous,
yes.
But I'm sure there are some lessons to be taken from both of those events in Boston as well as in China.
Yes.
And we have a lot of news coming out from both the U.S. as well as China this week. So why don't we start out with a look at the markets this week as well as economic data. So as we kicked off today's trading session, we saw the major equity averages in positive territory. The Dow is back above the flat line this morning and higher by about 0.1%, just higher by 26 points this morning. Meanwhile, the Nasdaq Composite Index continues to extend gains and is up by over 160 points, or 0.8%, and is well above that 20,000 level today. And the S&P 500 also higher by 0.4%, well above the 6,000 level. And we got some flash December S&P PMI figures. We saw U.S. service sector data surge higher and coming in at 58.5, but at the same time, manufacturing fell below the 50 level at 48.3. So what do you make of that ahead of all of this week's data, including retail sales tomorrow?
So it's really interesting that they both of these, the reports cite, the the upcoming Trump concerns about Trump and tariffs. The manufacturers are worried about it. Some of them actually have been stocking up on materials because they're afraid of how much prices could go up for some of their inputs. So they're worried about that, and trade getting suppressed because potential Trump tariffs. But services aren't really so susceptible to that. So they see deregulation, they see a stronger economy, a business-friendly economy. So the same reason is getting services hyped up, but manufacturing quite weak. And services is a much bigger sector of the economy. So very interesting dichotomy that they point to the same thing, but they react so differently. And to your point, in terms of the big moves that we're seeing in the Nasdaq and the S&P, we should mention Broadcom, which galloped 25% on Friday and is up again today because the CEO, Hock Tan, said, we have massive opportunity for AI. We've got 3 hyperscale customers who have tons of business and more developing. And is that all it takes to get the stock up 35%? Wow, that's pretty amazing. Unfortunately, I don't think I have any Broadcom in the portfolio, and I might have missed this boat at least.
Yeah, as you mentioned, we continue to see the Nasdaq Composite Index outpace the Dow Industrials in terms of gain, and that's a divergence that we've been keeping our eyes on. And as we head into the rest of the week, we'll be watching out, of course, for Wednesday when we get the Fed announcement and summary of economic projections, as well as Powell's comments in the conference. But before that, we get retail sales, and after the Fed rate decision, we get PCE figures as well as personal income and spending. So how do you think this week will play out?
So, I remember actually Christopher Waller in that really gem of a speech that he gave. Says we'll be watching retail sales the day before the day before the Fed decision. I can't see how any data is going to impact what they do, and if they did, it would really shock the market, and we would have seen a Nick Timiraeus article over the weekend. We did not see it, so I'm now quite confident that we will get 25 basis points. The question is, I think we had in the September summary of economic projections, something like 100 basis points of cuts in 2025. The question, I think, is it'll probably be reduced, but will it be 75 or 50? If it goes down to 50, I think the market actually could panic a little bit. But I don't think that's how the Fed moves. That's how the Fed rolls. I think they're going to not make any assumptions until they actually see the policy, and they haven't seen it yet. And Powell has said that, and it sort of makes a lot of sense. So I think it might be dialed back to maybe 75 basis points, but I don't expect something too dramatic out of the summary of economic projections. We may have to wait for March for that. So I think it's going to be not too many surprises. People are going to parse the thought pot for whatever they can parse it for in the commentary. And I think it'll be relatively well received, and the market may rally a bit on it. That they see rate cuts. Well, you know what? I don't know how much the market will change because this has been so expected. I expect sort of a stately reaction overall to the decision, unless Powell has something interesting to say.
And if we take a step back and look at where we were this time last year and the beginning of this year, there were so many expectations for rate cuts from the Federal Reserve, and the first rate decision we got was a 50 basis point cut, and it did not come until much later in the year. Right.
I mean, people were talking about 6 or 8 cuts. So, it goes back to the aphorism that I love so much. It's hard to make predictions, especially about the future.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
So we don't know where it's going to be. Maybe 3. Yeah, I think 2 to 4 cuts probably about right. But it depends on how inflation goes. That's why the PCE data later this week will be important for as we move forward. But it won't be important. It won't be important right now. And I would say that the truflation figures, which is a real-time measure of inflation, is above 3%, and that's come up in a straight line from around September when it was around 2 or maybe even just a little below. So some of that I think will eventually play out because I think that's actually a pretty good figure.
And one thing that I thought about was our conversation we had earlier in the autumn about the price of eggs, because yet once again, eggs are pricey, and that was highlighted in the inflation report last week. So.
As a matter of fact, I went to Costco Friday afternoon to pick up a few things,
Ah.
and the two dozen eggs that are normally $4.99 were $5.99.
Oh,
So
that's a considerable
$1.
hike.
That's a 20% move in eggs. I mean, it's just one thing, but it was enough to like move the CPI a little bit, because Costco usually keeps its margins pretty tight in terms of 13-14% above their costs. They moved it $1. That's a 20% move. And, one commodity, but a big move in eggs. So I actually went for the organic eggs, because the move, the difference between the regular and the organic, was less. So I said, I'll go with the organic eggs, which taste better. And so we cook with the regular eggs, and sometimes we make something with a ramen egg or something, something that you want to taste the yolk, then you go with the organic eggs.
Interesting. Well, that is something that we'll continue to keep our eyes on here in the U.S. And shifting our focus over to China, so consumption in China unexpectedly slowing as stimulus fades, and we got some economic data overnight, including retail sales, which rose 3% in November, which was the slowest pace in 3 months, but industrial production rising 5.4% in the latest month. So all of this economic data comes as policymakers vow to boost consumer spending. So what's going on here in terms of the reality on the ground?
So retail sales, at 3% versus 4.6% was actually, the internals were kind of awful. Every sector just was worse than expected. So it just basically says that the consumer is just worried. They don't want to spend. The other thing they had about home prices, and industrial production was good, but their home prices in their 70 cities declined the least in the last 3 months, but still declined. So it's sort of less worse, but still bad.
Yeah.
This is a problem for them, and the markets are unimpressed. The markets were down late last week, and they were down again overnight. The Asian markets, the Chinese over. It's not a lot, but certainly no confidence in we're really going to spend. Part of it is you're getting a sense where that the leadership may not be hearing the things that they want to hear, because if you say something that the leadership doesn't like in public, you're sort of silenced. So it goes back to the old joke about this, in the old days of the Soviet Union. In Soviet Union, we have freedom of speech. Yeah, you have freedom of speech once, and then you're gone. I mean, I found this really interesting. I think the journal reported it. Gao Shanwen, who was the chief economist of a state-owned brokerage, SDIC Securities, famously said a couple of weeks ago that his economic data was showing him that there are vibrant old people, lifeless young people, and hopeless middle-aged people. Because old people have money and are spending, the middle-aged are just kind of despairing, and the young people aren't doing anything. Well, his WeChat disappeared. So it just says, you work for the government. Even if you don't work for the government, you can't really say anything. And if you can't really say anything, then the leadership doesn't hear what it doesn't want to hear, and that leads to problems. And you would point to Vladimir Putin in Ukraine in 2022 when he thought this was going to walk in the park. It turned out to be anything but.
And we know that when it comes to the world's second largest economy, they have an official growth target of around 5%. Do you think they're going to get there?
I think they're going to get there or be just short. In fact, a lot of folks in the West don't really trust that number. How do you always hit that number exactly, right? They almost hit their targets exactly, and it's actually too accurate for people to think that it's real. We don't know what the real number is, but certainly wherever the economy is now is insufficient to keep everybody employed. And Freedom House came out with they compile a monthly report. Not official, because nothing official really comes out of China, but the unrest and the labor protests have spiked sharply over the past 2 months, and censors really keep those out of the public view, so they're really careful about writing them down or recording them as they see them, and they don't really get reported. But there's certainly the economy isn't growing nearly enough to keep people happy.
And Tai, I do want to shift our focus on over back to the U.S. And this morning, all eyes were on the crypto markets, and this came as Bitcoin hit yet another record high over the weekend, above 106,500. So quite a jump higher above that 100,000 level, but it has been seeing volatility, and we know that people in the crypto space industry, they've been paying attention to Trump's appointments, but also Arkansas Rep. French Hill to take over the Financial Services Committee, and he was also the head of the Digital Assets Subcommittee.
Right.
So he is someone entrenched and understands digital assets. What do you make of this?
So I think the reaction that we've had, it's been bouncing up and down below, above and below 100,000 Bitcoin, that is, and then dragging along Solana and Ethereum and the rest of the market with it. But I think French Hill, I think he got this on Thursday. He got the role on Thursday, which I think crypto likes that. I think it was one of the reasons why crypto seems, well, I wouldn't say comfortably, but is holding now above 100,000, which may trigger yet another round of buying, instead of having, as one of the analysts we interviewed here said, the boot on the neck of crypto by preventing banks and other large institutions from funding them. It's going to be a much friendlier administration coming in. So positive for Bitcoin, certainly in the short term. But while we're on congressional committees, there's a one that I should mention that's brewing that is probably not going to have any immediate impact, but its future impact could be really, really large. So the Republicans control Congress, so they chair all the important committees. But usually the breakdown is maybe 12 Republicans and 10 Democrats. So the most senior member of the party that is not in power is the ranking member. So a long-serving Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin decided he wanted to be the ranking member on the Judiciary Committee. He elbowed out New York City Representative Gerald Nadler to get that, but that left his seat on the House Oversight Committee, as a ranking member, open. So there's a fight, and I think it will. The election is probably the vote, I should say, is this week between Jerry Connolly, who I believe is generally a pretty run-of-the-mill representative, and AOC, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. The Pelosi and the old guard are really trying to make sure that AOC doesn't get it, because AOC is a bomb thrower. And they figure, especially given the whipping that they got in this last election, we need fewer bomb throwers. I think they're going to hold the line and get Connolly elected. But if AOC gets this seat, it's a really, really high-profile ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, which could easily help her in eventually running for president. So not anything will happen in the next, certainly at least 2 years, but this could be a big step for her and something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, definitely. And the countdown is on not just to the new year, but January 20th as well. So I think you and I will be discussing a lot of what unfolds between now and then. So that'll be exciting to keep our eyes on and to also highlight.
Right.
Yeah. And while we're keeping our eye on Washington, D.C., let's talk about Social Security, Tai. So millions of Americans are asking the question. So individuals can begin to collect Social Security as early as 62, but the big question about this is timing. So break this down for us.
So I'll tell you a little story just to have it, because this is kind of funny. TikTok's going away in about a month. Right, and I've never been on TikTok. I'm just a wrong demographic. I'm Gen X. I mean, my kids call me a boomer. I annoys me a little bit. And so I don't want to download the app. So I go on the website and I start flipping through the videos. I'm like, why would anybody want to watch this and this? And I go through one that says, talks about Social Security and when you should take it. And my daughter's, this is so boring. I'm like, no, I want to see this. And we watch this, and I'm like, honey, we have to have the talk. And it's not that talk. I had that talk with her a couple of years ago, but it was a talk about discounting and why if you get Social Security early, you get much less than if you take it later. So that sort of inspired me to want to talk about it today, because there's one point, and we'll get to it in just a couple of minutes, why it's really important to think about it. So let's have graphic one, and that's what you need to think about when you're looking at Social Security. So what age should you start to take it? You can take it any time between the ages of 62 and after. You would never take it after the age of 70, because then you don't get any bigger checks. But between 62 and 70, there's a big difference. If you take it at 62 instead of your full retirement age, which of people my generation is 67, you're getting something like 30% less per paycheck permanently. But if you wait till 70, you get 24% more per paycheck than if you were at 67. So there are a lot of things to think about, and actually relatively complicated. So what age should you start taking Social Security? Well, first, do you need the money? If you need the money, you should take it. Another thing to think about is, are you still working until full retirement age? If you're working at above 22,300 in income, they basically take away $1 for every dollar you earn. So if you're still working, you don't want to take it until your full retirement age, in which case you can make whatever. It's still taxable, but they won't take it away. And then I'll come back to 3 in a second. Number 4, did your spouse work? Because your spouse is actually entitled to 50% of your benefit or 100% of your spouse's benefit, whichever is higher. So let's go back to life expectancy, number 3. So let's go to graphic 2, first of all. So assuming at age 62 and age 67 to age 70, I did the math, and this is just pure arithmetic. I'm not talking about, not considering cost of living increases, which will go through everything, for every tranche, or inflation or interest, which are important, but not immediately germane to this particular chart. So if you start at age 62, as of 2025, your maximum benefit is $2,800. Age 67 is just over 4,000, and age 70, 5,100. So if you start at age 62 versus age 67, your break-even is just below age 79, which means you have to live to age 79 for it to make sense for you to have taken your money early. 62 versus 70, you have to be about 80. And if you want to say 67 and 70, it's another year later, age 81. So generally, in your mind, let's just say around 80 is your break-even. What's really interesting is life expectancy, because life expectancy isn't what a lot of people might think it is. So let's go to graphic 3. And this data is actually from the tables from the CDC. And they give you 60, 65, and 67. I've gone and calculated just 62 and 67. So if you were born in 2021, and this is the latest data they had, your life expectancy for all people is 76 and a half. For men, 73 and a half. For women, 79 and change. Right? So you're saying, oh boy, I should take it early if I have to get to around age 80 to break even. But if you look deeper into it, your life expectancy is different at different ages. So I've highlighted age 62 when you need to sort of, or maybe even a little, 6 months earlier, you need to start thinking about whether or not I want to take it early. Because when you're at age 62, your life expectancy isn't 76 on average. It isn't 73 for a man. It's actually 81 for all males and 84 for all females. And the reason is, if you get to a certain age, your life expectancy is longer, because all the people who drag down the average, the people who die in like car accidents because they're driving too fast, the people who overdose on fentanyl and other things that and severe, like people who are morbidly obese, are probably out of the equation. So your average is actually much, much higher. So that's why you need to think very carefully what's my life expectancy. And shockingly, well, not so shockingly, I guess, but interestingly, the life expectancy by race can be quite different. So we look at the general white non-Hispanic population at 62. The average is you will live to 82 and a half, with men at 81 and women at 84. Hispanics are actually a little bit higher, an average of 83 and a half, men living to almost 82 and women living to 81. So let's go to graphic number 4 for the other different ethnicities. I put all back there for comparison. A black person the average is 80 and a half, with men only living to 78 and a half and women at 82, just over 82. For Asians, probably because of the great diet and whatever else it might be, the average is actually 86 and a half, with men living to 85 and women to almost 88. So if you're Asian and in good health, probably a pretty good bet to wait till at least sort of full retirement age, if not age 70, because you're going to be collecting for a long time. So none of this is a secret. Actually, CDC publishes it, Social Security publishes it, but most people just think, oh, the average life expectancy is the late 70s, so maybe I should take it early. That might not be right. And there are a lot of things. I mean, not, all Asians are created equal, right? You're going to be a lot healthier than me, given your diet, than, at that age than mine. So think about your family's history. Is there a history of hypertension, diabetes? How old have your parents lived to? That stuff really matters. So, but what I wanted to bring to light here, and as I was explaining to my daughter, was what your actual life expectancy at age 62 or 65 is much higher than what people talk about. And then there are other things that we talked about: discounting. If you took all the money and put it in the bank and didn't spend any of it, what percentage of real return do you have to make it worthwhile? That's a whole different discussion. That's actually relatively complex because there's so many things going on with it, especially how long you're actually collecting your check. So check your life expectancy, pay attention to it before you decide if you're 60 and you're starting to think about it. Now, obviously, talk to your tax attorney, talk to your financial consultant, because this is pure commentary and not financial advice.
Yeah, absolutely, Tai. And when we think about this discussion of retirement age, that is something that different nations around the world have been debating. And here in the U.S., the Social Security retirement age, I understand, is set to change in 2025. So combining that with life expectancy and just the fact that people are living longer, there's so many considerations here.
Yeah, and I wouldn't surprise me if they raise that. If the math gets to the point where we're living longer and they're paying out more, and the Social Security fund, so to speak, is going to go to zero by the early 2030s, that maybe they'll say, oh wait, if you go to 72, then we'll give you an even bigger one than the full retirement age of 67, which eventually might edge up higher. I'm not exactly sure of the policy, so you could see some changes. But listen, we want to live comfortably in our retirement. We don't want to. Certainly don't want to outlive our money. So these are important decisions.
Yeah, and speaking of decisions and retirement ages around the globe, we know that a lot is happening in terms of monetary policy and central banks around the world. Last week, the European Central Bank cut by 25 basis points. The Swiss National Bank surprisingly cut by 50 basis points. So while we're continuing our trek around the globe, why don't we land in Japan, and what's in store for the Bank of Japan?
So the Bank of Japan, economists were thinking that December was a 50-50 bet. But as of the last week, and I guess I don't follow the Japanese news really closely enough, the thinking has really gone to, even though half the economists still think that they might cut the, I guess the futures are only pricing a 15% chance cut on December 19th, which is the day after the Fed. They're more pushing it back to January. I think with the view that there is still some uncertainty, and why get in the fly in the face of the Fed when you could actually wait a month and things might be a lot more clear. And you can see that in dollar yen after a fairly sort of pullback in dollar yen. Dollar yen's been up six days in a row. I think it's trading about 154 or so. So threatening, although not quite, threatening to get back into that long uptrend. I don't know if we're going to see 160. I tend to doubt it, because Japan is sort of still in a rate hike cycle, and the U.S. is in a rate cut cycle. I don't think we'll see 160 again. So, but up around here or a little bit higher, if you're long dollar yen, could be a good time to take a little profit, because certainly the interest rate regimes are going a different way. The other thing I should actually mention is I think there's some fear, given what happened in late July when the Bank of Japan surprised the market, and we had a little problem here on August 5th and all the other markets as well, that they don't want to really do a surprise. And right now, a rate hike on December 19th would be a surprise, so we think probably not.
Yeah, that does remind me of what happened this summer on the heels of the BOJ announcement, and indeed what transpired on August 5th with the unwinding of the carry trade. But we have reached the end of today's show, so I look forward to speaking with you again, Tai, on Wednesday.
Oh, great to be here.
Thank you so much, Tai. And that will do it again for Global Money Talk live from the New York Stock Exchange. We're so excited to bring you daily coverage here on SamPro TV. You can check out the show anytime on our YouTube channel by searching Global Money Talk. Thank you so much for joining us. Tai and I will be back here on Wednesday, and 3Pro will be back tomorrow. Have a great day.